Hi, welcome to Blue Umbrella Books. We're here today. We have an author event. We have Dave Zeltserman here, and he's going to be reading from his horror and mystery novels. Come on in and check us out. So, welcome to Blue Umbrella Books, and we have an author here today, and it is Dave Zeltserman, who is a multi-genre author, and we're going to learn a lot about his books. Thanks for coming, first of all, Dave. It's so nice
Thanks,
to see
Russell.
you here.
Glad to
And
be here.
thanks. This is sort of our Halloween inaugural show, so I definitely want to talk about your horror work. But what? Just off the bat, I just want to know, when did you start? What was your first published work?
My first published work was a short story in New Mystery Magazine, a noir, really a crime noir story, and I was paid $35 for it, and it was probably the high. I've had lots of books published, a movie made, more movies in the works, and getting that first story published was the highlight of my. I mean, I think every writer feels that way. It's like you're finally accepted. So, no moment.
And how old were you?
Oh, I was probably trying to think when that was. It was 92. So some quick.
Like 30s.
30s.
Yeah.
30s.
Something. Okay. Good. But you obviously you've been writing a lot before then, though.
No,
I mean, are you
that was the first story I submitted.
Oh, but I mean, had you been writing before, though? I mean, had you written all your life, or were you a late comer to the?
My background was math and computer science in college. I was working as a software engineer. I didn't get a chance to take much English in college. I was always interested in it, so one of the English courses I did take was creative writing, and every once in a while I would try to write something and it would be pretty bad. And it wasn't until I started reading Jim Thompson that I kind of found my voice. I saw how Jim Thompson just broke every rule imaginable.
Great crime noir novelist. Right?
Yeah, and I found it very liberating reading him, and it kind of opened my eyes as to that I didn't have to write bad.
Right.
I didn't have to write bad Ross McDonald. I didn't have to write. I didn't have to try to ape someone else. It helped me kind of figure out that I could just
Find
my own voice
Yeah.
and break the rules as long as I figured out how to make it work.
Yeah.
And so that kind of opened the door. But up until then, I always read a lot. When I was in college, I was reading, a book a day usually.
And were you reading in that genre? Were you reading the Ross McDonald's, or were you
Yeah.
reading horror, or were you reading other things?
My reading started off, as a kid, I was reading a lot of fantasy, a lot of Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft, and at some point, and then I moved on to science fiction, Ray Bradbury, Asimov, writers like that, Silverberg. And then at some point when I think I was 13, I was at my uncle's house and he had a copy of I, the Jury by Mickey Spillane. And once I read that, there was no going back. So from that point on, I got into crime fiction and, moved from Spillane to Hammett, Rex Stout, Ross McDonald, and continued on.
Yeah, and so, but you were just as a reader. You didn't have like aspirations necessarily.
No.
You weren't even thinking about being a writer at that
No,
point.
I was a software person, and the idea of ever having anything published seemed ridiculous, seemed impossible.
So you have the first story published, and you're in your 30s, and then where did you get to the point where you're like, I'm going to be a professional writer? Because you are a professional writer right now.
Yeah, I enjoyed the writing, so I wrote. So after getting my first submitted story published, I then decided I was going to get something published by Hardboiled, the magazine that Gary Levisi had.
Gary Levisi, yeah, right.
So I kept submitting story after story to him until I finally wore him down, and I think he bought maybe the 7th or 8th story that I sent him. All the other stories eventually ended up getting published elsewhere, but at the time I just kept submitting until he bought something. And and then I tried my hand at what became my first book, Fastlane, and I wrote something that I thought was good, and that had an interesting story because when I wrote that, if you sent a submission to a publisher and a decent query letter, they'd actually look at it. So I was actually getting a lot of responses from editors at the Big Six, and I was getting nice rejections that this is good, but we're not going to publish noir. And I sold that first to an Italian publisher. There was this noir group called Rara Avis.
How'd you come across them? I mean, did you?
Well, there was this noir group called Rara Avis, and so after getting all these rejections from publishers, I took the self-publishing route with iUniverse, and some of the noir readers on Rara Avis started reading it, and they were talking about it. One of the guys on the group translated for several of the Italian publishers, so he read it and sold the idea to one of the Italian publishers he worked for. So that was my first book sale.
Do you read Italian yourself?
No.
So you have no idea.
No, and what's interesting is I'd shown it to Vicki Hendricks, who wrote Miami Purity and some other really good noir novels, really good writer, and she liked it, and she suggested I send it to Serpent's Tail and tell them that she liked it, and so I did, and I called up. I remember calling up Pete Ayrton, who was the publisher, and he sounded very annoyed that I called him and said, "Yeah, we got it," and then I never heard anything. And then years later, they ended up publishing Small Crimes. And when I was talking to my editor, he had never seen it, and I showed him Fastlane. He said, "If I'd seen this, I would have wanted to buy it."
Right.
So eventually,
Did it get an American publisher?
Eventually,
Yeah.
English.
English.
Eventually, it got into a very tiny micro press called Point Blank Press that ended up publishing me, Alan Guthrie, Dwayne Swizaniski, and so it published a bunch of first books from writers who ended up
Doing great, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So these were crime books, right?
Right.
The first
crime
ones were
noir.
Crime
And
noir.
crime noir has, noir, there's a very fine line between noir and psychological horror. The whole point of noir, at least my view of noir, is more the classical view, like, James M. Cain, where you have a character crossing a moral line and they're doomed. No matter what they do, there's no escape for them.
Right.
Jim Thompson took that same approach, except he added a certain psychotic element to it, where these characters just had no idea how effed they are.
Right.
They're doomed from the start.
Maybe you know who. This is a quote I often tell people. I don't know who actually. I can't remember who actually said it, but it's boy meets girl, boy flushes life down toilet.
Yeah.
That's like that noir. That's the noir plot line.
Yeah. Yeah. So with noir, you're following a character's descent into hell. So in a way, that's very horror-ish. And so there's not a big stretch between
Right.
that type of noir and psychological horror.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and that's what I'm a big fan of Robert Bloch, and he definitely goes back and forth with that stuff himself.
Yeah.
And so you kind of sort of established yourself sort of as a crime writer, a mystery writer. These Julia Katz, did that precede your horror books?
Well, what happened with Small Crimes? So Small Crimes gets rejected it was the third book I tried writing. So
Yeah, I'm sorry. By the way, Small Crimes, great crime novels, also was made into a Netflix
into a movie that Netflix bought. So what happened was, second book I wrote was it was a crime novel with either metaphysical or supernatural angle, depending on how you look at it, called Bad Thoughts. And so, I couldn't get anyone to buy Bad Thoughts, and I wrote Small Crimes, and I thought this novel should get published. And so every New York publisher rejected it. And
did you have an agent at this time, or were you?
I had an agent, but
Okay.
but he wasn't really all that helpful. So so I started talking at that time with Serpent's Tail's editor, who was a member of the Rare Avis noir group. And at that point, Ken Brune and Vicki Hendricks and some other authors had taken a look at small crimes and wrote, very favorable stuff about it. So John Williams, who was the editor at, kind of fabled editor at Serpent's Tail, told me, the chances of us buying it are about zero. We only buy things if we feel if we absolutely can't live without it. But I'll take a look at it if you want me to. So I sent it to him, and a year later I hadn't heard anything, and I knew Ed Gorman. Ed Gorman was a good friend of mine and a mentor of some sorts. Really great guy. And so Ed he had this imprint, this library publisher imprint with Five Star, and they were publishing mysteries. So he said, he wanted me to submit it to Five Star. And I really didn't like the idea of sending it and just having it published only for libraries, but I was getting ready to just throw in the towel.
It's been a year, and
and everyone else in New York had rejected it. I was getting ready to throw in the towel, so I sent it to Five Star, and they wanted to buy it, and I kept putting them off. They sent me a contract, and so when I finally gave up on Serpent's Tail, I signed the contract, put it in the mailbox. The very next day, I get a call from John Williams telling me, "Dave, we absolutely love the book, and we can't live without it." So I spent the next month, I got some of these gray hairs trying to work something out
of your other...
work something with Five Star, and they were good about it. They ended up taking Bad Thoughts and publishing that, and so Serpent,
they got a book out.
Yeah, so Serpent's Tail published Small Crimes, and the book got some really nice reviews. Got a starred review in Publishers Weekly and some other newspaper reviews, and then it just looked like it was going to die. And then NPR picked it as the top crime mystery novel of 2008. And that gave it second life and got people in Hollywood.
Yeah, I guess then it got their attention. And
got their attention and got attention for some, current books of mine that I'm close to seeing made into films. So I have film deals for other books, and one of them would be getting filmed now if the director and star didn't have a conflict in the scheduling. So if things. Assuming that nobody quits, it will get filmed in
what's that?
Caretaker of Lawn Field.
Oh, okay. I got that here.
And outsourced.
And that's
that's
more of a psychological.
It's either it's considered horror, but I look at it as more as a fable.
A fable, okay.
But it's American Library Association picked it as one of the top horror books of the year, and. What they wrote about it is it's a horror novel for people who don't like horror. And Library Journal picked it as one of their horror gems, and it was finalist in some awards. And
so now, I am curious though, just about how so you kind of started out as a crime writer, but
that's
then,
my true love is crime noir.
But how did you get into? Because like I said, I do want to talk about the Frankenstein book you wrote. Where did that fall in all this, and what brought you about to do that?
Okay, so at this point I had published my two 5-star mystery novels, thrillers, whatever you want to call them, Bad Thoughts and Bad Karma. Fastlane was published in Italy and also by this tiny micropress I had. Crime novels with Serpent's Tail, Small Crimes, Pariah, both of those books Washington Post picked as best books of the year.
Okay, and there's also Crime.
Killer is probably the best of. I actually wrote those first three as a unrelated trilogy of sorts. Each one starts with a very dangerous guy getting out of prison and then following the path he takes.
Right, you have that. You do have this sort of anti-hero character. Is that the anti-hero character? What's his name? I'm sorry.
Well, no, there are different characters in each book.
Oh, okay, but you do have
But there's that theme where in Small Crimes you have this disgraced police officer, Joe Denton, getting out of prison, and he goes on a path seeking redemption. There's not a chance in the world he's going to obtain redemption because he's not really quite honest with himself about what he really wants. And Pariah, that's my South Boston Mar book. You have this guy, very dangerous guy who used to be, my my crime boss in this novel, I call him Red Mahoney. So this character Kyle Nevin used to be Red Mahoney's right hand man, and he was set up by his boss to go to prison. And now that he's out, his path is he wants revenge, and he wants to reestablish himself as a top guy and someone for people to fear again. And in the third one, Killer, which is a much quieter, more meditative book than the others. You have this guy who used to be a hitman for the mob. This is based very loosely on Martirano, the hitman who worked for Whitey Bulger.
Right. Okay.
What this guy did was, what Martirano did was he, I can't remember how many people he killed, 20-something people, and he made a deal with with the prosecutor that he'd give up Whitey Bulger for a severely reduced sentence. So the whole idea of letting someone who murdered over 20 people get out 10 years later or 15 years later, whatever it was, kind of struck me as not being right. So in mine, you have a hitman who's also makes a deal to give up his boss, except in this, nobody knew that he was a hitman. They just arrested him for a very violent crime, and it's only after he makes his deal to get out 10 years later that they find out that he confesses to all his other crimes, and they find out that he killed 20-something people. And it's what type of ramifications is this going to have, him getting out of prison 15 years later, 10 years later, and all these relatives of his victims around, and all these people who want to see this guy dead. So his path is trying to understand himself and reestablish a relationship with his.
Now, what are you drawing from, Dave? I mean, are you just? Do you do a lot of research, or I'm sorry, I don't know your actual. It doesn't sound like you have any law enforcement background, or anything like that. So
no, but
an interested observer
of human nature.
Yeah, right. And from Boston too. So now you're
from
the Boston area. So you seem to be steeped in that kind of world.
I mean, Pariah came from reading, spending 30 years or so reading about Whitey Bulger and what was going on there. And it was also a book written with a lot of anger. I was getting really pissed seeing all these South Boston Irish mob guys getting their tell-all books published by the big houses, and I had everyone reject small crimes. So the book is a very fierce novel. It's really it's also very subversive, and it's part.
So that's what makes you go to your typewriter
For that book.
Rage
for that book, and so that book was written partly as a crime novel and partly as a satire on the publishing industry. So it's a.
I'm sorry. Which one was that again?
Pariah.
Yes.
I mean, Washington Post picked it as one of the best books of the year, but they also called me a sick puppy for it. And it's unlike. I mean, when I was, I had just gotten small. I was getting attention for small crimes. So I was having different editors from St. Martin's and elsewhere calling me, and when I was showing them Pariah, a couple of them who looked at it just told me nobody's ever going to publish this. And I had like the film company that was behind Pulp Fiction contact me, saying, asking to get a look at Pariah, and I told them, you're not going to be able to make a movie on this, and they said, if we can make Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs, we can make anything. And so they got back to me, you're right. Although the director who made Small Crimes would love to make, if he can ever figure out how to do it, he would love to make Pariah. He loves that book.
And so, well, what's so funny, we, my friend Sue Buffum here is a local author. She'll be here with us. So, Dave will be here for our Ghost Stories Live, but self-published, but also knows what that's all about, and we. It's a strange world. She also is the founder and the head of Westfield Whip City Wordsmiths, and we often talk about that. And it's like these people are trying to get things. They're trying to break into that world, and it's really hard.
Let me tell you.
I think people are really interested because
I've been
somebody who's made it knows it's a terrible.
No, it's
thing.
really the publishing industry has changed dramatically since I got Small Crimes published to what it is today. Um, it's become much harder for. Here's an example. I have had several really good PI writers ask me to blow up their self-published books. Like I'm very reluctant. I'm always reluctant to look at a self-published book just because I don't want to have to tell the author I didn't like it, and I've seen a lot that really haven't been that good. These recent ones that I've been asked to look at, they're really good. I mean, these are people who could have been up there with Robert B. Parker 20 years ago. I mean, and the publishing industry won't publish hard-boiled PI unless it's or PI novels unless it's from a really big star these days. It just won't happen. So these are books that 20 years ago easily would have been bought by the big six, and now they have or big seven, whatever it was then, and now they have no chance of getting published by today's publishing industry, zero chance. And
I'm a private writer, so I understand. It sucks. I chose the wrong genre.
Yeah, yeah. What I've been telling I've gotten to know one of these writers pretty well. And what I'm trying to tell him is he should figure out a way to rewrite his PI novels as science fiction but still the same stories, but in a science fiction landscape. Because I think in the science fiction landscape, publishers are more open to this. But in the mystery space, forget it. It's just not going to happen. And what's also happens,
girl books are big.
Yeah, and also the midlist has
girl in the shower, girl on a train.
Midlist has gone away. There's no midlist anymore. There have been massive changes because of Amazon self-publishing and also the effects Amazon's had with bookstores. Like with Small Crimes, when that came out, a lot of the sales came from independent bookstores and mystery bookstores where people had found the book and were hand selling it. That's not going to happen now, not that often. I mean, there's still bookstores like yours, but there are a lot less of them than there used to be. In Boston, there used to be 2 mystery bookstores. Now there's 0. In New York, there used to be 4 mystery bookstores. Now there's 1.
I used to work at Black Orchid with. I already mentioned that. Yeah, but yeah, exactly. I know. I think there's just mysterious bookshop. Right?
So you have Michael Connolly. He wouldn't have survived if he didn't have these mystery bookstores and other stores hand selling his first half dozen books before he found an audience, and that just doesn't happen now. So the pressure that Amazon has put on bookstores and the whole independent or self-published movement has basically eliminated the midlist. Publishers now, it's unless it's a star, they're not going to publish it. They've become it's a boom or bust cycle with them, and I've known many very good writers who've had 1 or 2 books to make it now, and that's not going to happen unless there's a lot of promotion behind their books, and then they can't get published again. So I think the publishing industry has followed society as a whole, where it's the haves and the have-nots, and nothing in between anymore. And that's.
But congratulations! You definitely seem to have pushed and shoved and elbowed your way in, despite that.
What I did was I wrote books that were different, and so that got them noticed, and were good enough that I had Book List and NPR and Washington Post and other people picking them as best books of the year, and that got Hollywood noticing. So there's a lot of luck. I mean, I've had 4 film deals so far, one of which has made its way to getting actually made and distributed, and its distribution is Netflix, and I have 2 others that look closer, one that died, and I have other books that people are trying to get film deals for. So without that, I would have had no chance of, I'd be basically gone also right now.
Well, good. Yeah, there is sort of a luck.
There's a lot of luck.
I have heard that. I think Andrew Vox had said that. There's so many talented people out there, but you know, somebody's just make it. Now, I'm again, because it's a Halloween show, I do want to get to the Now, why? Where did the Frankenstein book? How did that come about?
Okay, so
Now you're a fan of Frankenstein novel.
yeah, it's a great novel, and the Frankenstein novel is a mix of Frankenstein and Marquis de Sade. So it's a retelling of, in a sense, of both Frankenstein and 180 Days of Sodom, and
And what? How did you even like start to even think? I mean, did you always?
you never know. You never know where your ideas come from. So in this book, I think it's my best written novel, and I think it's my wife's favorite novel. Yeah.
Excellent, good.
But it's also a
on
novel.
my Halloween reading list.
It's also a novel. You know, it's a novel that, you know, again, Booklist picked it as one of the best horror novels of the year. Other people, WBUR picked it as one of the best novels of the year. But it's also a novel that, what I discovered writing a Frankenstein retelling is that there are a lot of Shelley fans who do not want to see Frankenstein retellings. So
You want to keep the. So you got angry letters? Did you get, like death threats?
Well, no, not quite to that, but you see some very angry Goodread reviews and stuff like that, you know, and but
Well, no, that's why I am impressed, because that's so true. I mean, I would be I'm afraid to touch other people's, you know, treasured whatever, you know.
So here's the idea.
But a lot of people have done it. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
Kuntz did a whole series of them as well. Yeah.
So here's the idea. What if everything Victor Frankenstein told Captain Walton on the boat was a lie? So the book follows the same roadmap. Everything that could have been witnessed happens in Monster, but for very different reasons. And, you know, thematically, it's about the corrosive aspect of revenge. And so the plot is, you have Frankenstein and the Marquis de Sade, which, I mean, it works perfectly because Marquis de Sade was around the same time.
Same time.
And he would have been out. He would have actually been free and available during a certain time slice when the book would have taken place. He would have been outside of the Bastille and other prisons. So the idea is, what if Victor Frankenstein and Marquis de Sade get together because they want to bring life to what they consider his greatest work, 120. It's 120 Days of Sodom, yeah, whatever. And so they want to bring it to life by recreating it. And Victor, and as part of that, Victor has found a way to reanimate life, and the story is told from the point of view of the monster. Obviously, in Shelley's book, part of the story is told from the monster, but here it uses a premise that what Victor told Captain Walton are all lies, and this is a true story, and it follows along that path, and it's you know, it's a very I think it's a very emotional book. And
So now, just because it's a classic, so of course you read the book, but did you go any further into? I mean, did you?
I did a lot of research.
Yeah.
This was the one
What
book
did
that I did a lot of research. I had a friend who was working on a doctorate in 18th century European history, which was like the perfect person to give me a reading list of what I needed to research. So he gave me a list of about 20 some odd books, areas to research, and I spent about a year researching it. And you know, it was very nerve-wracking, the whole idea of writing a Frankenstein retelling. You know, like, well, I can just sit down and write anything else. The idea of writing this, I felt like I had to get it right.
Right. Well, yeah, because you're right.
And-
That's what I'm curious about. Yeah.
And what was that? What was that famous German supernatural writer from this? Just drawing a blank on his name. He has like all these initials and then his name. So he wrote some famous tales, such as a woman being brought back to life with a clockwork woman, Emerald coming to life, and so I kind of used some of his
Nice.
tales,
Oh,
merged
cool.
some of those
Yeah.
into this, but
Right.
for much more horrific effect. And you know, had some of the London gang stuff that I researched. I came across this London gang that used to cut off their noses and collect the noses of the poor unfortunates that they came across, and I worked that into it. And just worked Samuel Hahnemann, who was also around that time. I worked him and homeopathy into it,
Oh,
and so there was a lot that got worked into this. It's a
wow. So yeah, well, that's great. So you're researching, and then you're like, oh, this is great. This is exactly what.
yeah,
After 50 pages, I found a gem of.
and I tortured myself by reading a lot of reading a lot of Marquis de Sade's works, which are really pretty soul deadening things to read. But he was an interesting guy. I also read some biographies on him, and
I think we have one of those.
he was a fascinating person because he was very as sickening as his works are, he was a very moral person, in that he during the terror, during
Inquisition?
the France,
Yeah.
when they were guillotining everyone,
right.
he was a judge, and he was made a judge, and he found reasons to free people, as opposed to doing what he was supposed to do, which was send them to the guillotine. And this included his in-laws, who he had good reason to want to send to the guillotine, and so he was actually
He
sentenced.
wasn't as
He was actually sentenced to the guillotine because of that, and it was only a clerical error that he survived that.
wow. That's great. Wow.
So he was an interesting person, even though his works are.
Oh, that's great. And so,
Ghastly.
so it's actually more. It's a historical fiction as well, then.
And it's very horror.
Yeah.
It's you could argue that Frankenstein is science fiction. Monster is very horror. And the title I wanted to give it, which would have been a much more apt title, was The True and Horrible Story of Victor Frankenstein. And that had kind of a nice pulpy feel to it. And the reason the publisher wouldn't let me give it that title was they claimed that bookstores were telling them that people would think it was nonfiction if we gave it that name.
Well, we have the memoir of Elizabeth Frankenstein, his sister is, or whatever, or his half sister or whatever. Well, it's I'm interested. It's just the fact that what do you think? Why do you think people keep coming back to Frank? I mean, there's been so many Frankenstein films.
Yeah.
And then again, there have been all these books. I mean, what is it about that you think? And what inspired? What made you go through it? Because you went through a lot to make this book happen.
Well,
I mean, what kept you going?
Well, the monster story in Frankenstein is very touching and very very involving. I mean, here you have a guy who has every right to demand from Victor Frankenstein that Victor make him a mate, that he shouldn't have to be the only creature alive who has to suffer and live alone. And Victor agrees with that and understands that, and but he also sees what the consequences could be if things go badly, and he creates a mate for the monster. And the whole
Race.
yeah, the potentially the end of the human race.
Yeah.
So the whole back and forth with that, and the dilemma that it's just a fascinating read. It's just a very it's a great novel, and that's why there've been so many adaptations of it, so many theater, movies, TV. In my opinion, the very best screen adaptation was for TV. The Showtime show Penny Dreadful. They captured the monster's story better than anything else.
Oh, I didn't see that. Oh, so I'm gonna check that out. That sounds great. There's a series called Penny Dreadful, and they did Frankenstein.
They did a whole bunch of different storylines that are working at the same time.
Oh, okay.
And so
Oh.
the monster's storyline and the monster storyline, Victor's storyline. You've got a storyline involving vampires and
Oh, okay.
and
I'll have to check it out.
witches and the devil, and so it's an interest, and the werewolf. So it's a
The whole
so it's all
universal
mixed. It's all
crowd,
mixed
yeah.
in, but the representation of the monster was just pitch perfect.
Oh, well, I just reread Mary Shelley's Frankenstein last week, and I'd forgotten how great it was, and I love her introduction too. I love her talking about how she created it, and I think she's just a very candid thing. But also, I mean, one of the things that struck me too is like, well, we are the monster. I mean, but we can't talk to our
Right.
creator and say, hey, what's going on? Why did you make me? And why'd you do this to me? And make my life better? And
Well, the whole thing of Victor abandoning his child. He gives birth to the monster.
he runs away.
And he
I mean,
runs away.
basically.
And he runs away. And the
leaves
monster
town.
is pleading with him.
He is like the first deadbeat, or he is a deadbeat dad because he just like totally abandoned.
He abandons it and then comes back. Was a month later, whatever, just hoping the monster, the thing is gone.
He just died. Didn't you die? Why aren't you dead?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God, it's terrible. Yeah, he's awful. He's off like partying with his friends and.
So it's I mean it's just it's a great story, and there actually was there was a Castle Frankenstein where there was a guy who was trying to reanimate bodies.
I did not know that.
Yeah, that was
No.
sometime in the
Really?
and Mary Shelley and her husband.
She does not admit. She doesn't talk
There's
about
always
that.
been rumors that was the inspiration, but her and her husband did visit that castle before this was written. And of course, the story of how it was written. You had the contest,
Right.
to write ghost stories.
And the other ones wrote poems, and she actually wrote a novel.
And you had one guy write I think it was the first vampire novel.
Yeah, one of the first vampire things. Yeah.
And that was just a 15-page story or whatever, but it was.
Yeah, everybody else. Yeah, she actually did a full length thing. Yeah, she's.
Yeah.
Again, because we're doing a Halloween thing, I am curious about this book, "The Boy Who Killed Demon," and how that come about.
Okay. This was my fourth book with Overlook Press. So Caretaker Lawnfield was my first, which is really my most interesting book with them, other than Monster maybe. But Boy Who Killed Demons, I kind of took that.
Is it a young adult book at all? Or no?
It's somewhere. I think it's just a book.
Okay.
It's a book that I wrote.
I was wondering if I could sell it to my
It's a-
teenage.
It's a book that I wrote that I would have loved to have been able to read when I was a teenager, but it's also a book that I think is adult readers also. So
Okay, excellent.
so that was one of the problems with that book was when I was sending out, people didn't know whether it was a YA book or an adult book. So I ended up with Overlook again. I had people interested, but they just couldn't. They couldn't like the YA people couldn't sell it to their bosses because they thought it was too much of a adult book, and the adult, so what I did was, this book is probably my most personal book in a way. I decided I was going to place it where I grew up, and actually
Where?
place it on my.
Which was where?
What's that?
Which was where?
Newton, Massachusetts.
Okay.
And place it on the same street where I grew up. Now, the house and other circumstances would be different, but I'd have this kid in the same high school I went to, doing some of the same things. I used to go to this this bookstore, used bookstore in downtown Boston when I was a kid. Me and a friend, we'd go to this place called Cornhill's Bookstore. And I have no idea where it is now. Somewhere near South Station, but I can't really. It was kind of like a maze to get there. And the guy who ran it was kind of this gruff, unpleasant person. And so I kind of wrote him the way the bookstore in this, I kind of wrote the same way this guy was all those years ago.
Excellent, yeah.
And so the idea is you have this.
Sounds like it's almost like you're it.
You have this guy, this kid. I think I have him as 16 or 17 when the book it's written in diary form or journal form. And when he was 13, he started seeing some people, not many, but every once in a while, you'd see someone as a demon, not as a person. And as a demon, as with horns, red skin, tail, claws, you know, instead of their voices being human, they'd be like guttural growls and snaps. And one of these demons lives down the street from him. And so at first as a 13-year-old, he's thinking he's mentally ill. But as he's researching it, he starts realizing that maybe these are really demons, or maybe they're not. Maybe he is mentally ill.
Right. Well, that's
and
always
you're not
the
sure
fun
from
part.
the
Right,
journal.
exactly. You don't know which way it's going to go.
When he takes photos of them, the photos come off as them being human. When he looks at them, he sees them as demons, and and as he's researching it and finding ancient books on demonology, he starts, and looking at other things that are happening in the world, he starts convincing himself that these are actual demons and that they're in league to open up the gates of hell, and he has to stop them. So it's a little Lovecraftian. It's a little it's a little going back to my own
That's
childhood.
great. No,
and
that's
my
great.
own,
Yeah, exactly.
and I think it's a
I
fun
hope
book.
you'll inspire some young man to go out and kill the demons in his neighborhood, sort of a breakfast of champions moment where it's like, oh, this book is all about me.
So there's this one ancient book that's rumored about. There's one ancient demon text on demonology that was supposedly written in the 1500s in Italy, and he's desperate to get a hold of it because he feels that this book will have the key. And he finds and on his next trip to Cornhills, the guy has it, but of course it's priced way out of any amount of money he could have. And one of his few friends, since his life is spent trying to understand and figure out what these demons are up to, one of the few friends that he has left, his dad collects expensive comic books, so he makes a deal with this bookstore owner that if he trades him some rare
Comics,
like Spider-Man #1, Amazing Fantasy #15, that he trade those for this text. So he has to figure out a way to steal the comic books from his friend's dad, but eventually he gets that text, and the text will confirm everything that he's been suspecting, or does it?
Or not, right? Yeah. Oh, cool. Oh, I can't. It sounds like a fun. I'm looking for that one too. It's so cool. Let's. What are you working on right now? What's? I know you're probably. It sounds like you must have at least 3 things going because you've already so prolific as it is.
I have. Husk
stories.
just came out.
What?
Husk.
Husk.
Out.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have that right in the store. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me. Tell me about Husk. Now that's it's set in Massachusetts. It's a horror
it's set in
novel.
New York.
Oh, it's set in New York. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought it was set in. But it's a horror novel, and there are cannibalistic aspects to it.
So here's the mythology behind Husk. Let's say there were these hidden cannibal clans throughout the world, United States, and actually throughout the world. And the cannibals, the members of these clans, they're different than humans. They're similar but different. They're stronger than us. They're physically a little bit different, faster than us, and they have to eat human flesh. They've been feeding off human flesh throughout the history of mankind. And if they don't, any other meat makes them, or animal product makes them intensely sick. If they don't eat human flesh within a certain amount of weeks, they get hit by what's called the cravings, which will eventually drive them insane. And so in Husk, Charlie Husk is a member of the Husk clan, and he's a little more.
It's his actual name. That's right.
He's a little more curious than the other members of the clan. One of his duties is to go out amongst us and collect stragglers to bring back to the clan. but he also, is interested in more interest in the world in general. He's, the Klan has their own library books because the people who have that duty to go out into the world have to understand things enough to be able to do that, and he keeps adding to that library, and he likes to read, even though the members of the Klan aren't too happy about that, and so as the book starts. He's got his van out on the Mass Pike, and he stops off at a rest stop. He's not planning on picking up anyone at this rest stop. He's there just to get some coffee and to stretch his legs. And he witnesses this fight between a couple, and he's hoping, he sees that the couple's going to split up, and he's hoping it's the guy that will be looking for a ride, because he wants him to be his first victim, but instead it's the guy leaves his girlfriend abandoned there, and he's a little disappointed in that, because he doesn't really want her to be his first victim, but plus she's very small and thin, and there's not going to be much meat on her, but he offers to give her a ride, but something happens. Throughout his existence, he's always looked at us as them, as
other
foods, as a food source, not as, and instead with her, he actually looks at her as a person, and he finds himself very attracted to her, and instead of throwing her in a sack and throwing her into the back of the van, he ends up having no choice but to actually give her a ride to New York, where she was heading. And the attraction's mutual, and he just decides he's going to abandon the Klan, and as long as he has a chance with her, he's going to live in New York and figure out a way to fight the cravings and live as one of us.
Right.
And he's going to find that abandoning the Klan is not as easy as it appears. And
they do not want.
Well, I don't want to give too much more away,
but then he has to deal. I didn't realize the craving is that makes it hard.
So it's a stranger in a strange new world type of book, where things that we take for granted, like he wants a job. He wants a job so that he can afford his own place, and so that he could start dating her, and getting a job without a Social Security number or being undocumented is not so easy. And the type of work that he wants to do, that he's good at and that he enjoys, building houses, doing carpentry, he can't do, and he ends up working as an undocumented dishwasher, and everything that, and at the same time he also has to be dealing with figure out a way.
I know, and he's working with basically grocery items. His coworkers are grocery items usually for him, but they're now. And
just the smell of cooking beef or pork is going to make him ill.
Yeah. Oh, really? Oh, okay.
But again, he's willing to do whatever he has to try to.
And now this came out. You'd written a short story, and this kind of like a blossom out of that. Is that?
I got invited to contribute a story to an anthology of cannibal stories, and the idea of doing that did not appeal to me, and the only reason I agreed to do it was because Lawrence Block was going to be part of that anthology, and if Lawrence Block's going to be part of it, I'm going to write a story. That was one of the reasons I wrote these stories for what's the name? There used to be these erotic horror books, Hot Blood anthology. They were like
I bet, I'm sure
there were like 12 of them that came out, and when I was first asked to write, I mean, they're paying decent money, but the thought of writing it did not appeal to me. But I was looking at some of the authors they were publishing. They were publishing authors like Lawrence Block and other people of that nature. So I was like, okay, if Lawrence Block can do it, I can do it. And so that was actually kind of interesting, because the first story I gave them was a noir story where I didn't really have anything erotic about it, and I threw some stuff that really wasn't all that erotic in it to
throw some panties in there,
and so it was really like a pure noir story, and they published it, and it wasn't really what the readers wanted. So for the next, so I was invited to submit to the next book, and I decided to give them exactly what they wanted. And I wrote this Lovecraftian story that the first half's very Lovecraftian, the second half is just really disgusting. It's the only thing I've never let my wife read. So I sent it. So I sent it to them. I'm really happy with the first half. The second half, and it's just disgusting stuff, but it's what they wanted. So I hear from the editor. The editors, they're thrilled. It's like, can you cut down on the first half? Can we get to the good stuff later? It's like, but so getting back to this anthology of cannibal stories, if Lawrence Block was going to write a story, I was going to write one. I actually came up with an idea that I liked, and I thought worked really well. And in this story, you have this woman. She was going to go to a inn with her boyfriend somewhere in Vermont, and her boyfriend for work had a cancer, and she's pissed, and she's going to go by herself anyways. And she picks up this hitchhiker who's going to be like a husk-like character. And she finds him very interesting, very different, and she ends up agreeing to take him to his remote village, and which ends up being deep in the backwoods where they have to hike, and she's wondering, what the hell am I doing? And
scared already.
and so it ends as people working the field start coming towards them, carrying their very deadly looking tools, and it's actually a joke story. It ends with a joke last line. But it's a story that I liked, and I always like joke stories.
I get like I said, Robert Block, and he's great for those. Like,
and Holland Ellison,
Sweets to the Sweet and things like that.
Yeah, Holland Ellison had a great joke story dealing with a demon that was just a demon that could give wishes.
Oh.
Very nasty little creature.
Yeah,
I think the story was called Nasty, but it was a great joke story.
He's done a couple of them. Yeah, they're great.
And so what I did was, after writing this, I came up with I had this idea for the flip side of it. Something, take this story and turn it on its head. And the more I kept thinking about it, the more I wanted to write it. And so that's what Husk became. And I've had several of the reviewers tell me they think it's my best book.
Awesome. So. Oh, that's great. Right. Wait, I can't. That sounds great. No. I'm also, so your wife reads your stuff, but now how does she face you when you write really? I mean, because sometimes.
What did you think of Pariah?
You have to go pretty far. I mean, we were talking actually the other night about a writer friend of ours, Tom Dede, had these rape scenes in his stuff.
I don't.
And it's like, it's always hard when you're like, I know that guy, and why is he writing these rape scenes?
Yeah, I mean, I have bad stuff happen, but I don't think I have any rape scenes in any of my books.
It's a big horror thing, though. Yeah, and it's like I have trouble with that
although Monster, part of the plot of Monsters, they've kidnapped all these young.
Well, I was going to say,
they've used
with the Marquis of Sade, how can you not have some?
Yeah, they've used the Monster as part of a plot to kidnap all these young women, all these young girls and boys throughout Germany, and they have them imprisoned in their castle that they built to reenact 120 Days of Sodom, and so yeah, there were terrible plans for them, but of course the monster's going to save them.
Just a nice guy with a big imagination.
Exactly. Thanks. But no, I have to say, all the really great authors I've ever met always had a great person behind them. So you must be.
She is.
That's so great. Thank you. You're Judith. Judy. Thank you. Yeah. No, I can see that. That's so great. Yeah.
And
that's so helpful to have somebody you can show something to, as opposed to like, I'm going to send something out and a month later or a year later you're going to hear something about it.
And, Monster's it's a horror novel. It's some really horrible things are in the works, but I think the ending is, it has a nice uplifting ending.
Okay.
Kind of a very soulful ending.
Yeah. Okay.
But
excellent.
some of my stuff is incredible, pitch black. I mean, Pariah is a pitch black book. But then I also write the Julius Katz mysteries,
Yeah,
which are just
right.
these amusing.
So
fun
now,
little
do you
mysteries.
know? So you read the Pitch Black. I mean, but you have to go to, and that's always fascinating me about like horror writer is the going to that pit, and
I would say my
how do
noir,
you
my
back
noir,
away from that? You know, how
yeah, my
do
noir
you-
stuff is a lot more pitch black than my horror. But yeah, you know, it's part of. You know, when you're writing something.
Are you afraid you're ever going to go too deep or get
I'm
too deep into it?
With Pariah, I did start living with the main character in my head, but that was the only book that happened with. You know, when I'm writing, though, you know, you start with I start with a detailed outline because I need a roadmap of where I'm going.
Plot wise, you mean?
Yeah, yeah, very detailed, and then as I'm writing, it becomes something organic. It becomes something alive, and it will force me to deviate from the outline. New characters might get born, but I always kind of force my way back to it. But the book does at some point become something, you know, goes from being just something I'm writing to something more living and breathing. But you know, but when I'm done, well, you know, but it's only you know, but I can walk away from it. And you know, the Julius Katz stuff is those stories are stories I write to have fun when I'm
Yeah.
in between novels.
Now that I mean, I haven't. Are they good detective story? By
They're
your own
pos-
opinion, I mean, are
Well,
they
they've-
good? Are they whodunits? Can I?
They're whodunits.
Okay.
You know, they're
Now,
they're
do you
Nero
like
Wolfe
collect clues?
pastiches.
I collect clues because
I
that's.
think
like
they can
part-
all be solved.
Okay.
I think they're all fair play. They're all
And now
written.
they're collected in. You have a collection of them, or yet?
So Ellery Queen, I think, has published either 12 or 13 of them. So I took the first 6 that were published and I put them in a ebook and also as a paperback.
Okay.
So I did that myself.
Okay, because I think I do have. I think I have a copy, but I think I have it. I have the ebook.
Okay.
But and that's why the name like instantly like, and of course I used
So
to
the-
work at Ellery Queen.
So they're written as, you know, I mean, the Nero Wolfe pastiches. They have the same. I think they have the similar tone as Nero Wolfe. You know, so they're not cozies. You know,
Right.
You know, Nero Wolfe, you know, had a iron fist wrapped around that velvet glove,
Yeah.
wrapped inside that velvet glove.
And you had to
and,
have a client, you know, didn't do anything
sometimes,
for free.
yeah,
really.
yeah. I mean, so the big difference, you know, I mean, you know, they're a pastiche, but there's some major differences. You know, my character Julius Katz is obviously a play on Nero Wolfe, and he has an erstwhile assistant named Archie who narrates, but my Archie is not flesh and blood,
He's a.
and he narrates it. He's a tie clip. He's this advanced piece of technology that's 20-something years more advanced than anything any lab could imagine, and he has a
Almost like Siri.
AI. You know, he has a self-adaptive AI that, and he was fed. His knowledge base was all the classic hard-boiled PI novels, all the Nero Wolfes, all the Chandlers, all the Hammets, you know, and he has a neural network that keeps adapting, and he's constantly trying to adapt his thinking so that he can beat Julius Katz to the punch in solving a case. So he's always like 1 or 2 steps behind, or several steps behind Julius, and so he'll come up with what he thinks is a intelligent way to solve it, but Julius will always be just a few shades smarter, and
Excellent. Well,
and that's
the human wins then.
and he always
It's like John Henry and the Hammer.
yeah, and he, you know, that's all he wants is to. I mean, he's very loyal to Julius. Just like somehow, even though he's a tie clip that speaks to Julius through a speaker that, you know, miniature speaker that Julius wears in his ear. There's a relationship there. It's similar to the father-son relationship that Nero and Archie had.
Right.
And you know,
Even though he's an artificial intelligence.
he's in some ways he's the most human character in the stories, and another disadvantage he has over the Flesh and Blood Archie is, well, the Flesh and Blood Archie could pester Nero, and Nero could threaten to fight him, but not much more. Here, Julius, if he gets really annoyed, he can turn him off.
Yeah, right. I'm taking your battery out.
And it's always disorienting, very disorienting for Archie when he gets turned back on.
Right. So how long has it been?
And so there were some major differences between Julius and Nero. I mean, they're both brilliant, eccentric detectives. They both are very lazy, who would rather pursue their own interests and work,
Right.
and take cases only so that they can afford
To
what they
pursue-
consider the
right.
civilized life that they want to live.
Right.
But Julius is a man. He's in his 40s, handsome, very fit, martial arts expert, 5th-degree black belt in kung fu, and he's a womanizer, which obviously Nero isn't. Any of those things.
Right. That's cool.
And he collects wine instead of drinking beer. And I know nothing about wine. Like Nero, I'm a beer drinker, but the advantage of having Julius collect wine is it always gives him incentive to take these cases, because Archie will tell him about this case of very rare wine that if he only had another $30,000,
Yeah.
they could put a bid in for. So
Exactly.
so that helps drive some of Julius's motivation. He's also a gambler, and he's a very good poker player, but every once in a while he'll have a really bad day, which also gives motivation to take a case. And let's see, what else?
And now are you playing, or will there be a longer? I mean, they're all short stories at this point, right?
I did write after the first story won the Seamus Award, and the second story was chosen by other Queen readers as their favorite story of the year, I thought, okay, if I write a Julius Katz novel, someone's going to want to publish it. That was my thought. And
That's what I would think.
And so I did write a Julius Katz novel, and I had an editor at St. Martin's wanting to publish it, and she was told by her bosses that readers don't want to read traditional mysteries with detectives anymore. And so what I did
I
was,
want to kick that woman in the nuts.
and nobody else had any interest, probably for the same reason. So I put it out myself as both a paperback and as a ebook, and it's called Julius Katz and Archie.
Oh.
And I think it's a really fun. So my dreams of writing a long series of novels died with that.
Right.
So instead, what I do is I just keep writing
Oh,
the short stories for Ellie Queen.
that's good. And they're loved though, and they've gotten several. I mean,
Last
three
year-
reader awards, right?
Well, they won twice,
Twice,
and last
okay.
year they got 3rd place and 8th place. So if everybody had just voted for one of them, I would have gotten 1st place.
yeah, you're victim of your own
I split the vote.
prolificness. Yes, you have to start writing less. No, don't
Yeah.
do that. Thanks. I'm gonna wrap things up because we're also gonna have a thing later on. But I would love you to sign the copies of our books we have
Sure.
right here, and then I'm gonna finish up, and then we'll put this on
Okay.
so the local people can see it. Thank you so much, Dave. Thank you so much.
Could have talked about
Yeah.
the small crimes film.
Yeah, we'll can definitely include that. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. If you want to do a little bit more about that, yeah. Oh no, actually, while we have it, actually, I do want to sit you down because actually I was going to ask you, how did that happen? Now, so we are curious. Everybody wants to know how to get a Netflix.
Did you see the movie, by the way?
I did see it, yes.
What'd you think?
And I loved it a lot. I loved the actors. It was great. I thought it was
Yeah.
great. But I hadn't read the book though. But I hear it's
Book's
a
much
different
better.
ending.
Well, no.
Oh. I thought I heard there was a slightly different change in the ending.
The last third of the book are, and if I was adapting it, I would have cut out the last third also, because you can only fit so much in a 90-minute film, and plus it would have been too expensive to film. And so the ending's actually the same, but the last third of the book has been.
Okay,
moved
well,
into
I do want, and that's one of the things that we actually like here too. We've been noticing is that people love to read the book and see the film and see the film.
There were
and read the
changes
book.
too.
Yeah,
Like,
they
the
like
whole
to-
the whole
let the
stuff
guy
between
jump in.
Scotty and Billy Ferguson and Manny. That was all kind of changed around, and I understand all the reasons why they did it. So the law changes in the book and the movie, but they did a really good job making the film feel like the book, and making Joe feel like my Joe Denton. Now, the way that happened was, again, when NPR picked it as the best crime and mystery novel of 2008, that got people looking at it. And, I've actually had other film deals before I got this. I was talking with, I got a call from Memento Films. They're this New York French film company. And so we were talking, back and forth for several months about optioning Caretaker of Lorne Field. And a few years before that, we almost had another film deal for Caretaker of Lorne Field. We had this Italian director who's about to become very big. He wanted, Giuseppe Capitando, he wanted to make it as his first film. He had just made this film that had won the Venice Film Festival, his first film called The Double Hour. And it was kind of a Hitchcockian type mystery so he was hot right then. And
And then he just.
so it was actually funny. It was actually
read
funny.
it, or-
I don't know how he found it, but somehow he found it because it wasn't being sold in Italy. But it was funny. Actually, that week I got a call from one film company about Caretaker, and then I got a call from this producer who's working with Giuseppe about Caretaker within like days of each other, which was just a weird coincidence. So I had to choose between which of the two, and I thought because this director was hot, let's go with the director. And so we had all this film interest at that time, and we had this film company that made The Lincoln Lawyer agreed to, they wanted to do it, work with him, and but they didn't want to pay me anything. These film people don't want. They hate having to pay authors any
Right.
advance.
The
They just,
yeah.
I mean, obviously
Option
you're
it
going to
for
make
10 years for $3,000.
option it for no money, and if we make it, we'll pay you for the rights. So my agent told them, no, you're gonna have to pay him a small amount, and so they begrudgingly agreed, and then they disappeared for a month, and when they were able to get hold of them again, they're like, now we're out. And by this time, Giuseppe had gone from being really hot to cooling off because the Venice Film Festival
It's over.
had happened months earlier.
There's somebody new.
So that whole thing died down, and then I had Memento Films calling me about Caretaker, and so we were talking for like months. We never mentioned Small Crimes, but I told them how Giuseppe was interested a year or so earlier, and so he still wanted to do it. So once they got him involved, they were more interested in doing Caretaker. And then when they finally made me the offer, they made it for both. They made me an offer for Caretaker, and they made me an offer for Small Crimes. And up to that point, we hadn't talked about it.
Huh.
And so I was thinking Caretaker would get made first, but the director Evan Katz, who made Small Crimes, he was very motivated to make it, and he was really pushing it hard. And we got Rumble Films involved as one of the producers, and they made Whiplash. They made trying to think of they made a few pretty well-known movies.
Did you have any input on the screenplay?
So I met with Evan. We talked. He showed me the script. I gave him my notes. He took maybe 5 or 6 of my notes seriously and made changes based on that. But it's his movie. He did what.
So basically, so somebody you didn't know just took your story and made it into a screenplay, but without really.
Yeah, him and
you
Macon Blair wrote the screenplay
Okay.
together, and so he made some changes based on that. And he did. If you saw the movie, there's a scene where this retired cop spits in Joe Denton's food and starts calling him a bunch of names. Do you remember that scene?
Yeah. Okay.
So Evan wanted me to do it, and
You'd be
which would have been really funny,
as a cameo. You mean?
A cameo, this guy who created this character, spitting in the character's food and calling him a bunch of names. And I like that, and the producers like that, and the film was being shot in Montreal, and the Canadian Screen Actors Guild would not give the part up for a non-actor who wasn't Canadian.
Oh, even though you're the author.
Yeah,
Aw.
so they
There
would, so
should
even
be
though,
a special dispensation for authors appearing in their work.
so even though it's like a 30-second scene, and I could have been in the background in another scene, but we wanted to go there the week we were planning to go there for a couple of days for the filming, and we wanted to be there when Robert Forster was there. We're big fans of him, and Jackie Brown, and the scene.
Isn't he Banyan too?
Banyan.
Yeah.
And the scenes, there were no crowd scenes with Joe and his parents. So we decided it would be better to do that than be in one of the crowd scenes.
Well,
So we went
we'll have
there,
to get you there.
met Nikolai, met Robert Forster. Actually ate dinner with him
Oh, that's okay.
on the set. Yeah.
Oh, good. You said that.
He told-
He looks like a great guy.
Yeah, he told us a bunch of really interesting stories, and he actually,
He's been
on
around
this.
for a long time.
Yeah, on the set, I was telling him about my book Killer, telling him that he should read it because he would make a great lead character. So last month we heard from him. He loved the book and wanted to know its availability. Now there's a lot has to happen from that to go from that to a film deal to a film, but it was kind of cool too.
It is cool. No,
Yeah.
because he's great. No, I mean, I think anything he's in is, I love him so much.
He's a
good.
great actor.
Yeah.
But I think everybody. I think Gary Cole, obviously Nikolai,
Yeah,
Jackie
Gary
Weaver.
Cole's
They were all.
awesome,
I
yeah.
thought Molly Parker. I thought they were all great.
No, well,
The
I mean,
acting-
you must feel very. I mean, you can't complain.
No, the
you
cast
have a
was
yeah,
cast was
exactly.
fantastic, and here's one of the differences in the book. Charlotte, played by Molly Parker, is just batshit crazy, and there's a lot more that goes on in the book with her. And in the movie, they hint very strongly that she's batshit crazy, but it's done more by hinting than what happens in the book.
Oh, what's that like when so you've written this thing and then you finally get to go to a screening and get to see, okay, here's my thing, but now it's not my thing.
Well,
it's somebody else's thing now.
Well, the first day we show up at the set. It's a scene where Joe is tearing apart his parents, who I'm looking for, whatever he's looking for, and so the producers put us in a room. It's being shot in this small house outside of Montreal. Producers put us in this bedroom, next door to the other bedroom, while they're figuring out what to do with us. And so they're blocking out the scene, and we just hear all this stomping and yelling, and hearing my book come alive. And it's just the coolest thing in the world, just hearing. I mean, it's obviously not my book. The dialogue's different, but still,
Yeah.
I'm hearing my book come alive.
yeah,
and
exactly.
So that was really amazing.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I love it.
And hopefully a caretaker, that will happen next.
Well, good.
And-
Well, no, well, you've definitely intrigued me to I feel like I should have read them all already. But anyway, Dave. So I'm going to just wrap up because I
Okay.
want people if anybody wants to get some books to talk to you personally. But thank you so much, and we'll see you for Ghost Stories Live later on.
Okay.